Okay, guys, let's get started again. Again, I'm reading from the book Gods of the Bible, and we left off on page 89. We're going to start again. Knowledge of good and evil. The story we have just read in the first part of this chapter forms the basis for the theological concept of original sin. From this concept stems the subsequent idea of eternal damnation that weighs on Adam and his descendants. Adam is banished from Eden, learns about death, and must work hard to produce food. Together with Adam, humanity also falls from eternal life and happiness into a state of death and pain. This damnation burdens all mankind. However, the banishment of Adam from Eden could hint at much more immediate and, in some respects, reassuring fact for humankind. Let us proceed in order. God warns Adam and Eve that should they eat the forbidden fruit, they will certainly die. Genesis 2:17. You must not eat from the tree of knowledge and good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. Why does God not forbid the consumption of the fruit of the tree of life instead? From Genesis 2:17, the prohibition applies only to the tree of knowledge, so that we might infer that the Elohim feared more that humans could reproduce than live forever, or better, long life. At any rate, it must be noticed that Adam and Eve eat the fruit, but contrary to Elohim's threat, they do not die. It's worth pointing out a curiosity often overlooked by commentators. In this sequence of events, God was wrong and the serpent was right. God told Adam and Eve they would die if they ate the fruit, but they did not. The serpent, on the other hand, not only said to them that you will not die, but they would instead become like God, which is later confirmed by God himself. The Adam has now become like one of us, knowing what is good and what is evil. Genesis 3:22. The serpent, the tempting adversary, spoke the truth while God was misleading. Genesis 3 verses 4 and 5. You will certainly not die, the serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. We might, however, think that the Hebrew wording of the Elohim's prohibition would not indicate a threat, but a prediction, as if the Elohim barely meant to say something like this. You will surely die in the future. If this were the case, however, we would have to assume that Adam and Eve were created immortal. But this is impossible because God himself throws them out of the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3:22 to prevent them from eating from the tree of life, thus becoming immortal. So they were not created immortal. The reader should also remember that immortality does not occur in the Bible, for we have seen that the Elohim themselves are mortal. All these contradictions show us that the Elohim were afraid that Adam would have access to those techniques which would guarantee him a long life as theirs, making a new species totally uncontrollable and dangerous. Apart from these pandemic arguments, we must acknowledge that the fundamental aspect of this passage lies in the description of the threat prediction mentioned, regardless of when and how it may have materialized. Let us not forget that the Hebrew exegesis also writes, death was in reality not a curse, but a normal consequence of human nature. It is natural that time, age, and decay would bring a man to such an end. To summarize what we have said so far. There is confusion in the identification of the two trees, and we do not know who caused it. The confusion could be explained by the fact that originally there could have only been one tree. Adam and Eve became disobedient and discovered their sexuality. Adam and Eve are not ashamed of each other, but fear the reaction of the Elohim, from whose gaze they hide. We have so far seen considerable differences between what religious tradition has reported about the fundamental concepts of original sin and punishment, with everything that resulted in the religious, theological, ethical, and legislative spheres and the biblical text. Now we must analyze one aspect of great importance, the so-called knowledge of good and evil. Traditional interpretation recognizes the true meaning of man's disobedience to God in wanting to determine for himself what good and evil are. This is the sin that we, as humankind, has carried with us since our beginnings. Thus, the tree of knowledge would allegedly and symbolically represent the ethical choice between good and evil and confront man with the possibility of freely choosing good, the will of God, or evil, that is, actions that do not take into account, or worse, contradict the divine will. Faced with this choice, the concepts of just and unjust, good and bad, lawful and unlawful, found their entrance into man's conscience, and humankind began the journey that led man to develop an ethical code, the beginning of the awareness of some innate mortality inscribed once and for all in the heart of humanity. My battery's about to go out. I'm going to have to stop at the end of this page, and we will start again on at the bottom of page 91.